Welcome to Leaders' Questions.
Children were not protected from the risk of harm. Taoiseach, that is the line that really sums up the HIQA report into governance failures at Children's Health Ireland, published this morning. The investigation was commissioned following revelations that non-approved springs were implanted in 3 children during surgery at Temple Street Hospital. And my first thought today is with those children and with their families. This report is a damning litany of failure. Failure of governance, failure of management, abject failure by government to act and ministers to do their job. This, after all, is the body that runs the major children's hospitals in this state, and the failures were widespread and systemic. Children's Health Ireland failed abysmally to keep children under their care safe, and in fact they put them in harm's way. These failures cover every area: management, governance, risk assessment, ethics, informed consent. And these failures happen because Children's Health Ireland is not fit for purpose, and they were allowed to carry on in that way. No overarching framework for governance, different doctors working at different hospitals under different rules, separate procurement processes across each hospital, no proper checks or oversight of process. Parents kept in the dark about the true nature of the surgeries carried out on their children, and very poor follow-up care for the children involved. All Taoiseach, the hallmarks of an organisation playing by its own rules outside of normal practice with zero consequences. Taoiseach, it's the responsibility of government to ensure that the most robust, effective and safe practices are in place at all of our hospitals. The failures at Children's Health Ireland were known for years. They were known to government, and yet nothing was done. And we're now witnessing this pattern of behaviour, dysfunction and scandal repeated again with regards to unnecessary hip surgeries on children. So there has to be accountability all round. There must be political accountability. These failures span 7 years, 2 health ministers, and were raised many times at the very highest level and raised here in the Dáil, Taoiseach. Government stood back and allowed this disaster for children's healthcare to happen and to go unchecked. Cabadal Conchuk Ella atá sa tuarascáil seo I dteap le núnach an rialtas Lani le scolos agus spina bifida, currach Lani I mhuil in áit iad a chusint mar bacór. Taoiseach, the trust of children and their families is shattered. It's a case of all promise and no action from government. Yesterday, the parents of 14-year-old Daniel Collins went to the media to call for an end to their child's suffering. He's been waiting so long for surgery that he now needs 2 operations. He lives with pain so severe, so chronic, that he's forced to sleep upright. He can't lie on the flat of his back. And Daniel isn't alone. Despite a litany of promises, there are 233 children still waiting for the spinal operations that can change their lives. So today's report must act now as a catalyst for real and meaningful change. Government must, of course, commit to ensuring that all of the report's recommendations are urgently implemented, and you, Taoiseach, must account for your government's and your ministers' failure to act. I'm aware, Taoiseach, that the chairman of the board of Children's Health Ireland has stood down, but can I ask you, in relation to the remainder of the board and the executive of Children's Health Ireland, do you have confidence in them?
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach, please to respond.
Well, just by the Caithfear Mé Rá go bhfuil se dod chreite an méid atá le stig den tuarascáil seo agus go raibh doctor ann a raibh sásta springs den taiseo a chadú in O'Bride lenny agus ní raibh cadúnt ann agus is dochrite an méid atá tar éis tarlú. I have to say at the outset, my thoughts are with the families and the 3 children and the trauma that they have gone through and are going through. It is beyond comprehension that springs that are not permitted were used in surgery. And the consultant concerned did use springs that were not CE marked. And that's the fundamental issue here. And then the terms of either the culture within the hospital that facilitated that, and there are governance and there are procedures, but the procedures weren't followed, either in terms of procurement, in terms of the use of these springs, or indeed in terms of any ethical considerations. This wasn't put before any ethical research committee. So, for example, if a consultant wants to engage in innovation and research in terms of techniques around particular surgeries or difficult surgeries, normally would go through an ethics committee within the hospital. That didn't happen here either. And the Minister of the day, and it was raised in a parliamentary question here, I think by Deputy Murphy, and an inquiry was established. And that's why we have the Health Information and Quality Authority. I established that myself many years ago to make sure that there was an external independent body to investigate and to ensure quality within our healthcare setting. In terms of let's be very clear, I understand where the Deputy is going in terms of wanting to sort of say it's ultimately government's fault. I mean, there's a limit to what anyone in this House can do in terms of how people conduct procedures in operating theatres. And let's call a spade here. And we can be political about these things, but there are fundamental issues here that happened that should not have happened. And there has to be individual responsibility. There has to be accountability in that respect. There has to be management accountability in terms of CHI and the board and so on, in terms of why the governance procedures were not followed and why they were essentially bypassed. All of the recommendations will be implemented. I do note that the chairperson, who's been there, I think, since 2013, has tendered his resignation. The Minister will, first of all, ensure the implementation of the different sets of recommendations for the CHI, the 9 recommendations for the HSE, and indeed the 1 recommendation for all services providers, all hospitals across the country. And will over time evaluate structures in terms of these issues. But again, it equally has to be said that a lot of progress has been made on the other side. No one wants to hear that today, but very substantial progress has also been made on a number of fronts. In terms of Daniel Collins, my understanding is that the clinical team are engaging with him now and with the family in respect of his situation. And I'm not at liberty to go into too much detail on that, but my understanding is that there is engagement with the clinical team. They will decide in terms of the clinical decision making around Daniel's particular case.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy McDonald.
Well, there an Taoiseach good she do crecha an méid tása Tuarascolach. Níl sé seo fear. Mar bhíos ag an Oireachtas. Bhíos ag na tuismothirí an méid a bhí ar siúl is CHI. You say this is incredible. It's certainly shocking and deeply unacceptable. But it's not incredible. This was known, Taoiseach. Parents knew it. Advocacy groups knew it. They raised it again and again and again. Wide-ranging systemic issues around governance and a lack of management. Issues around informed consent, deep ethical concerns were raised again and again, and they were ignored. Families and advocates met a brick wall. That's the truth. I don't know if you've studied the report, Taoiseach, in any detail, but this is not simply a matter of clinical decisions made in discrete circumstances in an operating theatre. And of course the clinicians need to be accountable. This is profound dysfunction, a pattern of it within the fabric of this organisation. The chairman of the board has resigned. I am asking you, does the board and the rest of the executive need to follow him?
Taoiseach.
It actually is fundamentally about decision making within the hospital setting and within the operating theatre, if I want to be blunt about it. And too much in this House and too much across the political world we immediately go to the political domain. There comes a time when we equally have to stand up for what is right and proper, and I know you want to. I know you want to. But let's call a spade here. What happened shouldn't have happened. There was an individual decision taken to use springs that should not have been used on any child. I mean, we're the biggest medical device manufacturer in the world, nearly, in Europe. There are set procedures, quality controls over medical devices that are to go into any patient. The idea that you would use springs outside of that entire protection framework is beyond belief. And responsibility there, in my view, lies with the individual in the first instance.
Thank you.
Lies with the, people talk about well-wishing. Look, it's as plain as
you,
night follows day. You do not use unauthorised devices on any child. That's at the heart of
Deputy
this.
Ivana Bacik.
Like, share, and subscribe to stay informed and help drive positive change.